Here we go. All ones.
Everywhere Robert Chapree looked were elementals, 2.5-meter tall giants from outside the inner sphere. They were literally throwing around his friends, breaking through the defenders' lines again and again with impunity. The only thing on Sheliak that seemed to stop them, in fact, was the referee's whistle. With a long, piercing shriek and a wide, circling hand motion, the referee pointed out the spot where a defending safety had managed to budge an elemental out of bounds after a 30-yard run. Chapuis shook his head as he watched an unmoving lineman get nudged by another player, who then waved for the medics. "Good thing the Bears let us up our bid, or we'd be out of players a long while ago," his friend Pedro murmured, to which Chapuis grunted his assent. When Sheliak, a resource-poor world in the Draconis Combine that had no standing militia, discovered jump ships appearing in their system, their first response was panic. However, the American Football Commissioner, Jimmy Straight Jim Lawn, managed to convince the planetary leaders that they did have one on-world force that could take the invaders. With reluctance, the leaders agreed, and when the Ghost Bears asked what forces defended Sheliak, the government bid the professional all-star football team. On the face of it, it wasn't a bad idea. Sheliak had 12 professional teams spread out across the world, and an incalculable number of scholastic and amateur teams. Sheliak loved football and held their abilities with certain smugness, but nobody had ever played against elementals. Play started again as Chapree watched in numb dismay as the Bear offensive physically pushed apart 2 trophy-winning linemen, holding open a hole for an elemental running back to sprint through. The runner shrugged off the free safety and cruised the rest of the field. It wasn't until the Bear's helmet was removed that he realized a woman had just ran 27 nearly unopposed yards. The Bears kicking team took the field, and a moment later, an elemental twice Chapree's size pounded the ball through the uprights for an extra point. The genetically enhanced infantry of the Ghost Bears' 78th Elemental Support Binary played football as a hobby and were leading 84-0 with just under 2 minutes left on play. For 30 of his 35 years, Robert Chapree played football. His dad never played higher than high school level, but he'd started his son playing as soon as he could hold the ball. Robert's mother tolerated his father's living vicariously through him as he began to show amazing talent. A knack for throwing that had his grade school coach quickly moving from running back to quarterback. He'd practiced and memorized plays since puberty, and then spent his puberty on football and cheerleaders in that order. But it wasn't until he had a chance at a college scholarship that his mother finally threw her support behind what she had always previously maintained was just a phase. 4 years at top play at university level, he was drafted by the Cleveland Commandos. They weren't the best team when he started, but the owners built a franchise around him, paying him millions of K-bills a year, plus the money he made in endorsements. His team playing in Royal Blue, the Light Mech their mascot, were potential contenders for the Sheliak Cup, and he lifted it twice in the course of his career. The final game played on the second Saturday of each November. He had already announced his impending retirement. His arm wasn't what it used to be, and his receivers simply weren't what they used to be, with the Commandos entering a rebuilding phase. He had been on the winning side of the All-Star team in late November. Though he hadn't started, it was members of both teams that the Sheliak bid to start against the Ghost Bears. He had been included in the bid since he'd been on the team, but Robert expected to simply warm the bench in a blowout. By halftime, they were behind 7 touchdowns, and injuries had forced them to begin playing secondary members of the All-Star team, pulling additional players out of reserve section in the stands. Chapree had been listed as a third-string quarterback, but had come in late in the third quarter after Elementals had knocked both the starter and alternate quarterbacks out with concussions. The Ghost Bears were now substituting in their second string, third string, and just about any elemental in the unit that wanted to play. Victory so assured they were treating it more as a session of physical training than an actual game. He jogged onto the field with a 46-minute left on the clock, his eyes searching the crowd, his breath steaming in the cold air, remembering. 2 months ago had been the depths of winter on Sheliak, his favorite part of the season. He was known as a snow leopard, a player who performed better as the temperatures dropped. Not 8 weeks ago, he had ran out onto a field before nearly 250,000 screaming fans in a blizzard. The snow had turned the game into an unpredictable mess of fumbles, interceptions, and insanely slippery tackles, and the crowd loved every minute of it. And they roared for the Commandos and the Gators every time blue crashed with green in the white morass, and he felt their energy pulsating in waves through the falling snow. There was no roaring now, the crowd sullen and withdrawn. Most had already left, and the remainder sat in their seats with disappointed looks on their faces. He couldn't see into the luxury boxes, but he wondered if his wife had left, or if she was staying around until the end. It was the last game of his career, and he had been given the opportunity to shepherd a disaster to fruition. He reached the huddle, 10 other players looking at him for guidance. He coughed and cleared his throat and said what they all knew. "This sucks." The players chuckled in mirthless agreement. Many of them he'd known for years, decades even. The rest were young stars, hotshots that would replace him and those remaining in his generation. It was the way of football, a demanding physical sport that used up, burned out, and wrecked players like no other. This particular game was injuring players at a record pace, even though the Elementals were playing a clean game. The cleanest you'd ever seen, actually. The Elementals apparently felt deeply shamed in the few personal fouls called on them over the course of the game, reportedly fearing it would besmirch the trial. "Anyone got any ideas?" one of the wideouts asked. "I'm rather sick of getting my ass kicked out there, so if anyone else would like to be an eligible receiver for a bit, that'd be cool." More chuckles. Then eyes slowly turned to Chapri. Something stirred in his brain. "We're not in a bad field position here, actually," he started. The huddle got quiet for a second, before voices clamored in disagreement. For most of the game, the elemental kicker had planted the ball in the crowd behind the end zone, resulting in the Sheliak team starting from their 20. This time, the kicker managed a bit of control, or simply had gotten tired of so many touchdowns and put it into the 3. The kick returner, a kid with more speed than sense, hadn't declared fair catch and miraculously managed to break a couple tackles, finally going down with a bone-rattling hit on their own 37-yard line. "No, I'm serious. Another 30 yards and we'll be close enough for Wortman to go for 3. Incredulous looks met his pronouncement. "Coach wants to talk," one said in a warning. Chapri whirled around, looked at the head coach, who was waving him over to the side. He shook his head and tapped the top of his helmet. "Trust me." The head coach, normally of another team in the league, but widely respected enough to have coached most of the All-Star games Chapri had played in, paused. Then he nodded, hit his fists together, and pointed towards Chapri. "Your ball." Chapri smiled and turned back to the huddle. "Guys, these guys don't know shit about football," Chapri started. "Bobby, don't mean to disagree, but we're getting our asses kicked out here." Justin Terry interrupted, a veteran player Chapri had played with and against many times over the years. "Yes, because they're milfing huge, I know. Which seems to be working for him," Chapri nodded. "That's all they have, gentlemen. We're professional football players. This is what we do. We owe it to the crowd, the world, ourselves, to put some damn points on the board." The rest of the team grunted in agreement. Robert could see the fire coming back into their eyes. "What's the plan?" "Halfback run left of the I formation. We won't get anywhere, I know," he said, forestalling an argument. "I just want them thinking we're going right on second down." Looks around the huddle. Shrugs. They broke to move to their positions. Chapri almost smiled. They were moving again, with a purpose they had lost 2 quarters back. They knew they couldn't win in the next 1 minute and 31 seconds. They simply wanted, like all men would, to be able to leave the field with their dignity intact. They sensed Chapri had a plan to recover that. Now he thought to himself, to come up with a plan. "Hike!" They were back in the huddle 7 seconds later. The halfback predictably hadn't moved past the line of scrimmage, leaving them on a second down and still on their 37. With 1 minute and 12 seconds left in play, Chapri scanned the huddle. "Isaac, I need you to swap with Lee. Send Lee out here," he said to one wide receiver. "I'm not too tired, Bobby. I can still play," Isaac Tuff, an older player, had been in since the half. He was breathing heavily. Chapri shook his head. "I know, Isaac. That's not it. I need Lee out here to run a routine with Thompson." His pride smoothed, Isaac headed towards the side. "What routine?" Thompson asked, wiping sweat from his dark skin and taking a swig of water. "The one you ran against the Tsunamis a month ago," Chapri responded, before turning his gaze back to the halfback and the line. "Pedro, hand off right and toss back. Everyone else, shift right. When their line follows, that'll open up a hole on the left for Thompson and Lee." "That'll never work, Chappie," Thomason said, calling him by the nickname used by everyone on the planet except the members of the Commandos, who knew how much it annoyed him. Thompson, however, played with the katanas with Lee. Wouldn't care anyhow. Lee jogged up as Pedro quietly announced, 7 seconds, Bobby, and only 2 timeouts." Chapri nodded, waited 4 seconds, and called a timeout to the referee. Whistle blew, and Chapri once again ignored the coach as he turned to the huddle. Taking 1 step forward, he grabbed Thompson's face mask and pulled him to the middle with him. "What's up?" Lee asked. Chapri ignored him, focusing on Thompson. "Listen, kid, and the rest of you listen too. We're going to get 3 points on the damn board if it kills every one of us. You and Lee run that routine. I've watched the films a million times. You were beautiful. You split the Tsunami's defense like it wasn't even there. The Bears won't even expect it." "We practiced it for months, though," Thomason protested. "You've never tried it. You'll never get the timing right." Chapri released him with a push. "Thomason, I've been playing professionally since you first used that thing in your pants with Mary Razor's skirt in high school. You run your routine. I'll get you the damn ball." The huddle was silent for a second before Lee asked, What routine is he talking about, Thompson?" Thompson stared at Chapri for a moment, and then looked around at the huddle. Though they hadn't said anything, the rest of the players' body language clearly validated their trust in Chapri. Thomason sighed in resignation. "Hook and ladder, Lee." An ancient quote ran through Chaprice's mind as he settled into position. 3 things can go wrong when you throw the ball, and 2 of them are bad. He chuckled mirthlessly at the thought, glanced up at the clock, still 47 seconds from the timeout, waited an extra second for his line to fix into position, and yelled, "Hike!" The center snap was clean, and Chapri immediately passed it off to Pedro, who went right, heading to the hole that wasn't there. The Bears expected the run. The genetically enhanced elementals were not only huge but fast, and had picked off enough passes in the first quarter that the Chiliac team had been keeping the ball on the ground for most of the game. But as highly skilled amateurs, they relied on their physical prowess to balance out a technically flimsy defense that wouldn't pass muster on a high school team. Caprice had noticed their weak positioning and the Bears' inability to read an offense. He was now counting on this observation as Thompson and Lee took off down the left side of the field, Thompson skimming the boundary line and Lee closer to the center. A pair of elementals took off after them, easily keeping pace a yard behind each. Concentrating more on him than on the runners, the rest of the line meanwhile shifted right, ostensibly to open a hole for Pedro Gonzalez while Caprice counted in his head. 1-1000. Gonzalez charged the line of scrimmage, Thompson and Lee already 7 yards out accelerating. 2-1000. Gonzalez hit the line of scrimmage and turned back towards Caprice. Thompson was about 17 yards down the line and Lee about 15. 3-1000. Gonzalez flipped the ball to Caprice. Thompson and Lee simultaneously turned towards each other. 4-1000. Caprice snagged the ball, rotated in his grip and put the laces right, and slid into a throwing position all in one easy motion. He'd been watching Thompson's every step since he left the line, 30 years of experience and muscle memory guiding his throw to put the ball where Thompson would be 1 second later. 5-1000. Thompson easily caught the ball and took another 2 steps, the elemental chasing Lee already veering towards him. The elemental behind him reaching for his shoulder, Lee maintained his direction and speed and passed under Thompson just as the elemental's hand clenched on Thompson's uniform. Thompson lateraled to Lee, who caught it with one hand, pivoted on his next step, and began accelerating down the field. Thompson shifted his course and slammed into the elemental who had been chasing Lee, barely rocking the giant but slowing him down momentarily to give Lee an extra second to pull away. The crowd seemed to collectively gasp at once and rocketed to their feet, screaming as Lee poured on the speed. Caprice watched the defensive line, gauging speeds as the Bears' safety sprinted on an intercept course towards Lee, the young runner slightly arcing for a sliver of more time. The Bear ignored Lee's attempt at a stiff arm and took him down on the Bears' 33. The crowd went berserk. The whole game they had only converted from third to first down twice. They had overturns or punted the rest. Lee's 30-yard gain energized the crowd and the team. But that hadn't stopped time. The clock was 36 seconds when Lee hit the ground, then paused for officials to move the chains. The signs along the side that visually displayed where the line of scrimmage was. Same play, Chapois bellowed, giving the coach the trust me sign again as he sprinted forward. It would only take the official seconds to in place, which would start the clock again. The coach looked at him askew, but then tapped back. Your ball. Chapois grunted to himself. You have no idea. The line began to set into place as the clock started again. Caprice reached his position and turned before the halfback arrived. Pedro Gonzalez is one of the biggest running backs Caprice ever met. He wasn't as fast as a true running back, but possessed that perfect combination of speed and brawn to power through small holes for small gains. He'd been playing with the Commandos for 3 years, so he knew Caprice well enough to know when the quarterback waved him over, he quickly leaned in. Blue Berserker left, Peely, Chapois whispered. Gonzalez looked aghast as the quarterback knew he would. We need another 10 yards to get Ortman in range, and I can't think of anything else. Caprice almost pleaded. We're out of options, and out of time. Tu es loco, Roberto, the big man whispered and chuckled, but then grew serious. But I'll get you those 10 yards, mi amigo, he whispered grimly, setting into place behind Caprice. He nodded back and yelled, set, then looked at the clock. 14 seconds. Hike. The Ghost Bears were ready, set into a deep backfield and double-teaming Thompson and Lee. Caprice smiled as the ball came back to him. He had gambled when he audibly said same play that the Ghost Bears would do exactly that, play against the pass. The Bears knew they were desperate, and desperate men do what works until it doesn't anymore. Caprice was desperate. The Ghost Bears simply underestimated how desperate by a few degrees as he faked the handoff to Gonzalez and fell in behind the burly halfback. Gonzalez cut left and plowed forward. As the one blocker left on that side of the line crashed into him, Gonzalez easily shunted him off to the side. The elemental looked surprised as he realized that Gonzalez had blocked with both hands. Realization set in as Chapois sped past. He felt time slow. Every moment was crystal clear. Every sense true. He could hear the crunch of the grass underfoot and the roar of the crowd. He could even see the cheerleaders who had been skulking before Lee's run, jumping now on the sidelines. He could see the cornerbacks realizing the pass they had been expecting somehow turned into a quarterback sneak, began sprinting towards him, far faster than he could have ever run even in his prime. And he could see the clock, glowing white digits counting down just above the goalpost. He focused on it as it changed from 7 to 6, and glanced out of the corner of his eye as he sensed more than he saw, a charging elemental behind him. The 21 will have to do, he thought, as he began to fall, one elemental wrapped around his legs and another a second from hitting his shoulder. Hold the ball, hold the ball, hold the ball, he ordered himself before he violently hit the ground. Chapois groggily came back to consciousness to sense someone nearby. Time out, he whispered, his voice weak and wavering. He heard a chuckle like a freight train. Your whole team was calling it the moment your knee hit, Spheroid. An audacious run. He started to prop himself up and heard numerous voices telling him to stay down. Go to hell, he grumbled, waving an unsteady hand at them, then slowly sat up. The crowd, standing on their feet in silence, began to roar, chanting his name, yelling and pounding on each other's backs. Robert smiled as he got up on his feet, shaking off the fogginess in his head. Well said, said the ghost bearer, offering Caprice his helmet. He hadn't realized he had lost it, and rolling his head around to loosen his neck, he put it back on and began to clip it into place. The medics kneeling next to a backboard stood and began to protest, as did several members of his team. Silence! The gigantic elemental said in a forceful voice that immediately quieted everybody on the field, though the crowd continued to cheer. He has earned the right to finish this game. He looked at Caprice. If you make this kick, I will adopt you into our clan. You will teach our Sibcos. Caprice shook his head and looked at the giant man. After we make this kick, he said, stubbornly correcting the elemental, I'm retired. The ghost bear laughed. Bargained and well done, quarterback Robert. Let's finish this. From Mark Ship's Sports Around the Sphere, published by Tharcad Media Associates 3066. Though the idea of bidding their football team against the Ghost Bears for ownership of the planet seemed like a good idea, no one expected to be playing against a team of gigantic elementals who knew the rules of the game. The planetary government handed Sheliak over to the Ghost Bears during the post-game show, after the final score was 84-3.